It's time for Law in Our Life. That means we have Hyunjoo here in the studio. Hello, Hyunjoo.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. And for our listeners just tuning in, Hyunjoo is a lawyer practicing here in Gwangju. Isn't that right, Hyunjoo?
Right.
And also, you did some studying in the States, and that's where you got it in your head that you should come here and help foreigners
Right.
with their legal woes. And we were just talking just before the segment started. I was asking you if Corona has made it a tough time for lawyers, and it sounds like lawyers aren't as affected as badly as some other professions, right?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Now, we're going to talk about something kind of interesting today. You were saying a law changed fairly recently.
Yes.
What's this law?
The Housing Lease Protection Act, 주택임대차 보호법, was revised and the new act became effective since July 31st last year.
It's pretty recent.
Yes. So today I want to talk about the new laws regarding the housing lease. As it has quite a lot of information, we'll address this topic in 2 episodes.
Okay.
And today is the first week.
All right. So what should we cover in the first week? What are some of the changes that came in this law?
Yep, the major revision of the act are the right to request renewal of the contract and the ceiling of the monthly rent increase. Therefore, if the tenant exercises the right to request renewal of the contract, the tenant can extend his stay in the rental property at the longest of 4 years.
Okay.
Before the revision, it was only 2 years. Also, when the lease contract is renewed, the monthly rent or the key money cannot be increased more than 5% of the previous rent or key money.
Okay. I think I understand. So that means if I'm renting, if my term's coming up, I can renew.
Yes.
And I can renew up to 3 times, right? For 4 years total?
No. You can use it just for 1 and 2 years each.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
your initial term would be 2 years, and then if you renew it, you will get additional 2 years.
Another 2 year. Okay,
Yes.
these are 2-year contracts. And that means that they can't say no. They can't refuse me and then raise the rent or something like that?
There is some exceptions that you cannot renew your contract. So we'll
Okay.
talk about that too.
Sure. Yeah, explain it.
So let's look at the right to request renewal of the contract. The tenant can renew the lease contract by exercising this right. There is a time window to exercise it. The tenant should inform his intent to renew the contract within certain time. If the tenant exercises his right to request renewal of the contract, the landlord cannot refuse the renewal without reasonable grounds.
Okay.
The tenant should inform his intent from 6 months to 2 months before the termination of the contract. Therefore, if the contract ends on July 30th, then the notice to renew should be delivered to the landlord by the end of June 30th.
Okay.
So how can I exercise the right to request renewal of the contract? You can renew it verbally, via email, or via text messages.
Yeah.
So there is no set method or a way of communication.
Right.
But you may use the formal letter, 내용 증명, to prevent future disputes.
Okay. But it sounds like an email or a text message as long as there was some back and forth.
Right.
You could have some record of it. Okay.
However, not all tenants have this right. For example, if he delayed the payment of the rent for 2 times or more, or if the tenant rented the house fraudulently with wrong information, if the tenant damaged the house intentionally or with gross negligence, and some other grounds set forth in the provision, then they may not use this right.
Okay.
Many tenants want to stay in the same place for quite some period, considering their stable life, moving costs, and children's school and neighbors. Therefore, many may want to renew their contract as many times as they want.
Okay.
So, how many times the tenant can use the right to request renewal of the contract to renew and stay in one place?
How many?
The tenant can exercise the right to request renewal of the contract once.
Okay.
And the term of the renewed lease contract will be 2 years.
Okay.
But there is something else. One thing to remember is that it's different from the implicit renewal of the lease contract. So the lease contract can be renewed without the exercise of the right to request renewal of the contract by having the implied consent.
Okay.
So if the landlord or the tenant does not inform their intent to each other to not to renew the contract from 6 months to 2 months before the termination of the contract, then the contract will be renewed with the same terms and conditions like the previous contract.
Right.
So by not talking to each other within certain time, then it will be renewed automatically.
Right, okay.
In that case, there is no limit number of this kind of implied renewal. The difference is that if the tenant exercised the right to request the renewal of the lease contract, the tenant cannot refuse it unless he proves certain grounds to prevent it.
Okay.
Like what I said,
Right.
whether there's damage or delay in payment, things like that.
All right.
Then, many may wonder whether the landlord can abuse these protective measures.
That's the kind of thing I was wondering.
Yep. And ask the tenant to give up his right when they first signed the contract.
Okay.
Yeah, because they know the law, then they will think about how to avoid it. So let's imagine that the landlord says to the prospective tenant that if you do not give up your right to request a renewal of the lease contract, I will not rent out this place to you. Then the tenant may sign the contract not to exercise the right to request a renewal of the lease contract.
Right. I want to rent the place. I'm desperate. And so I'll sign away my right for a renewal.
So what would be your defense?
Well, I guess I could say I would think that it's not legal to sign away your rights.
Right.
Like, I can't sign a contract entering myself into slavery. Right? Because it violates my human rights fundamentally. And so I would assume that there's something like this where even if the landlord makes me sign away my rights, I still have them.
Right. That's what it says in the law.
Good.
So such promise will be void.
Okay.
The law does not allow the landlord and tenant to preclude the rights of tenant by their own agreement. So like as you said, even though there is an agreement, it will be void and the law will be still there.
Okay.
So you can still use your right.
All right. Now, Hyunjoo, I'm going to ask you some questions. It's fine if you don't know the answers because I'm just, you're not a real estate lawyer and I'm just putting you on the spot. But, right away I start thinking, like, all right, if I'm a landlord, I want people to renew.
Okay.
Usually, right? Like, I want people to keep living in the place.
Right.
That's better. I would rather someone always be living in it than have, 2 months empty while I'm looking for somebody to put in there. So what are the reasons that maybe I would not want that? Like, who is this law designed for? So what if I tell the tenant, they say, I want to renew. And I say, no, I want you to move out because I want to fix this place up and really raise the rent.
That's for sure. And sometimes you may want to have your family members to live in that house.
Right. I know there's a law about that, but I'm just wondering, like, if I say I want to fix it up, can I make them move out?
Yep. Unless there is, so one thing would be, unless there is implied consent, like if you don't exercise your right or tell them that I do not want to renew the contract within certain time, it will be automatically renewed. So then they will just live there. Or when the tenant asks, exercise his right to request a renewal of the contract. As I said, unless there is you meet or you can prove certain grounds, then the right of the tenant will prevail. So it's more like to help the tenants to keep the place.
Right. And I guess also it limits the raising of rent to 5%, right?
Yes.
So if I'm renting from you and then I say I want to renew, even if you want to raise rent 10% for me, because of the market, you can only raise it 5%, right?
Oh, no, there is a way that we can increase the rent 10%. We can talk about it next week.
But in theory, let's say I've already used my one renewal. And then I say, I want to renew. Then you can say no, right? And then raise the rent like 30%.
So the right it's a different thing. So the right to request a renewal of the contract is one thing, and the fact that your contract can be renewed, that can be done by the exercise of that right, specific right, or by just being silent about the intent to moving out, and then the contract can be automatically renewed.
Okay.
So there is two different way to stay in the place. So depending on which way you choose, the percentage of the rent increase can be different.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what's the purpose of this law, because, I think landlords usually want the same tenants renting, because then there's a transition of the same renter. There's no empty period.
Because sometimes they cannot increase the rent.
Okay.
So, or sometimes they may want to, not because they do not want the previous tenants, but sometimes they want to increase the rent. And then if your current tenant cannot afford it, then you will look for the new tenants.
Right. Someone who can pay more. All right. Now I think I understand. It's about money.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you so much, Hyunjoo. We'll see you next week. And we can find this online, right?
Yes, you can find this segment in video and my YouTube channel. You can find me by searching Korean Law 101 on YouTube.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.